How can the Chicago Blackhawks offense get better? I'll look at some of the team numbers from the season to discuss what Kyle Davidson needs to address this summer.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. On today's episode, it's my Chicago Blackhawks offensive outlook. We'll also get into an update on 2024 first-round pick Sacha Boisvert before closing things out with my weekly Mailbag Monday segment. As always, quick reminder off the jump to hit that like button, hop in the comment section below, and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, all of which is 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really helps me out in a massive way in growing my platform. But happy Monday, everyone. Thank you all again for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Hope everyone out there had themselves a lovely Easter weekend. First thing I wanted to get into today is a Chicago Blackhawks offensive outlook, something that I also did when the season wrapped up last year, and in the coming days, I'll be going over a defensive and goaltending outlook as well, leading into my Chicago Blackhawks season recaps, where I'll dish out a grade to each and every member of the Blackhawks for their performance this season. And hop in the comment section below right now, Hawks fans, and let me know who you want to start things off with. Should it be Connor Bedard, Alex Vlasic, Ryan Donato, Frank Nazar, Spencer Knight? Give me your 2 cents below in the comment section. But for my Blackhawks offensive outlook to open things up on today's show, I wanted to take a look at some of the offensive numbers from the team here this season, as well as some individual stats, and just talk about where the Hawks offense is at right now in their rebuild and where they need the most help moving forward here this summer. So looking at some team statistics from the 24-25 season, first, starting with goals per game, the Blackhawks actually went on a nice run there in the final month of the season, which I think was definitely benefited from the youth movement and the influx of speed that was added to the lineup. The Blackhawks climbed up the goals per game ranking there late in the season, wound up finishing 26th out of 32 teams, averaging 2.73 goals per game. Next, we look at shots on goal per game. The Blackhawks didn't fare as well in this category, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, the next categories I'm going to get into don't fare as well either. Hawks were dead last in the NHL in shots on goal per game, averaging just 24.4, and they were last by a pretty significant margin, Blackhawks fans. Next closest to them, the team in 31st, was they averaged more than one shot than the Blackhawks did per game, and the Hawks were the only team in the NHL to average fewer than 25. The interesting part of this statistic, though, Blackhawks fans, despite the lack of this team getting the puck on net again here this season, which us Hawks fans clearly recognize based on the number of shoot posts that I saw on social media, the real kicker here, Blackhawks fans, is this team was 10th in the NHL in shooting percentage. So whenever they did get the puck on net, they found the back of it pretty frequently. And whenever I looked at some individual player statistics throughout the course of the season, most of these guys were in double digits. The Hawks just couldn't get possession enough or sustain possession enough in the offensive zone to really create all that frequently. But whenever they did, they were pretty efficient with those chances. Another spot where the Blackhawks were actually pretty efficient this year was also on the power play. How about this? The Blackhawks finished with the 8th best power play in the NHL, converting on 24.9% of their opportunities. Really impressive stuff. The problem is they were 30th out of 32 teams in power play opportunities with only 189. And I think that's mostly due to, again, the lack of possession, the lack of true dangerous opportunities that this team was creating on a nightly basis. However, I will say, I think there was probably a case for the Blackhawks to be a little bit higher up in this ranking because, as I pointed out so many times throughout the season, I really never like to be that guy. But the officiating this year as a whole was absolutely horrendous, more so than I feel like it's ever been. And it was more often than not, I swear, unbiasedly skewed against Connor Bedard in the Blackhawks. I don't know for whatever reason, but it happened so often that it felt like it wasn't a coincidence at that point in time. However, the Blackhawks still would have been in the bottom third of the NHL in this category, again, pointing to the lack of true puck possession that they had this season. And speaking of puck possession, let's go and dive into some of the possession analytics from this team this season. Looking at the Corsi for percentage at even strength, which for those of you who don't know what Corsi is, it's the shot attempts versus shots for that your team puts up at 5-on-5. The Blackhawks were dead last in this category, with a 44.09 Corsi for percentage on the season, meaning of the 100 in terms of a percentile shots that were happening through the season, the Blackhawks averaged just 44% of those attempts. The actual shots on goal percentage, the Blackhawks averaged only 44.28% of the shots on goal. That was also 32nd in the NHL. In terms of goals for at even strength, they weren't dead last, but they were 30th with 42.02% of the goals for share at even strength. And then in scoring chances and high danger chances, they were dead last in both of those. 42.22% of the scoring chances and then 41.64% of the high danger chances. Huge gap for them in last place in that category. So again, just looking at these numbers, comparing it to the eye test from watching basically every Blackhawks game this season, yeah, it was very obvious to tell that there just wasn't enough high-level skill on this Blackhawks team to really dig them out of holes, or whenever they were in close games, it just wasn't able to come to the forefront because the Blackhawks were just getting outskilled when it comes down to it. And then to further this point, I think a little more, looking at some individual statistics from the Blackhawks this season, didn't have anyone with 70 points. Connor Bedard was their leading scorer with 67, 23 goals, and 44 assists in 82 games. Ryan Donato, the second leading scorer on the team, was 62 points, 31 goals, and 31 assists. Teuvo Teravainen was third with 58 points, 15 goals, and 43 assists. And I got to give Teuvo a little credit. I gave him a lot of flack in the first half of the season, and even dating back to last summer, he wasn't really my favorite signing. I didn't like the decision to bring him back, if I'm being honest. But he was much better in the second half of the season than he was in the first. The playmaking abilities were on display a lot and were truly much needed, but we do at the same point in time need more from him in the goal scoring categories to only have found the back of the net 15 times in 82 games. And I believe 9 or 10 of them only were at even strength. That's just not good enough. And then Tyler Bertuzzi, was fourth on the team in points with 23 goals and 23 assists, And honestly, with the way Bertuzzi was utilized this year, I think it was pretty impressive that he just even hit 20 goals. And then Nick Foligno was fifth on the Blackhawks in points. Had Seth Jones remained on this team for the full season, he would have been in this top 5, but because he wasn't, Nick Foligno wound up being the fifth leading scorer for the Blackhawks with 35 points. And while I know there were some guys traded, and I know there were a lot of youngsters brought on to take some opportunities away from some other guys later on in the season, Nick Foligno is the fifth leading scorer for this Blackhawks team. I think goes to show you the offensive problems that they have. And I don't mean that as a knock on Nick Foligno. It's just a knock on the group that the Blackhawks have as a whole, right? They only had 2 guys reach 60 points this year. They only had 4 guys, Ilya Mikheyev in those final games score 20 goals. They just don't have enough help. And looking at the roster breakdown for next year in terms of, I wanted to go and look at some of these numbers. Now it's about how can Kyle Davidson go and help this forward group moving forward? What do they need to address? Just looking basically at the roster makeup for next year, the guys who are already coming back under contract, assuming that they don't get traded, there's really not a ton that the Blackhawks can go and do to this forward group as a whole, again, because there's going to be a lot of young guys that I know they want to be getting opportunities to. But to me, the spots where the Blackhawks, where Kyle Davidson can and address this forward group to help make them better next year is definitely inside the top 6. Because that's the areas where the Blackhawks need the most improvement. Connor Bedard needs more help than he's gotten so far, for sure, in his first 2 NHL campaigns. And quite honestly, I think those are the spots where it makes the most sense for the Blackhawks to bring in help. Because like I just mentioned, the guys who are already under contract, assuming they're being brought back next year, Nick Foligno, Jason Dickinson, Joe Veleno, those are for sure all bottom six guys. Ilya Mikheyev, while I love the way he goes about his business, in a true sense of a lineup, he's probably a third line guy at the highest, a second line type of guy. All of those guys you think are going to be brought back next year. And then also in a bottom six role, you could have Landon Slaggert, you could have Colton Dock, could have Lucas Reichel, who's got one more year under contract. Could also have Oliver Moore and Ryan Green, who made their NHL debuts late in the season. And again, because of where the Blackhawks are at in this rebuild, I don't think they're going to be contending for a Stanley Cup playoff spot again next year, sadly. It makes sense to be giving young guys the opportunities here in the bottom six. So I think the areas where you really can address for this forward group is the top six, and just going and piecing together a top six right here, right now, which again is difficult to do at this point. That looks like there's an opportunity for some spots to be available. Just throwing a hypothetical top line together right here, right now. Tyler Bertuzzi and Connor Bedard, I really think the Blackhawks should be putting them together for more time next season. I think Bert's ability to crash the net and go score dirty goals there could also open things up for on the outside for Connor Bedard. And I like the chemistry they had with one another when they did play together this season, but I don't think you can run this back. It would be a failure to run back Tyler Bertuzzi, Connor Bedard, and Ryan Donato, or Teuvo Teravainen, Connor Bedard, and Ryan Donato. It's time to go and get Connor Bedard a legitimate top-line line mate, and there are options for the Blackhawks to go and do that in free agency. So I really think that's a spot that Kyle Davidson can and should address. And honestly, Blackhawks fans, one other thing we have to consider here, Ryan Donato, what he does and whether he re-signs with the Blackhawks, I think is also going to dictate what Kyle Davidson can do here in the summer, because let's say Ryan Donato doesn't re-sign. Well, the only true top six guys who I think the Blackhawks currently have on the roster would be Bertuzzi, Bedard, Frank Nazar should be the second line center to open things up next year, and then probably Teuvo Teravainen. You could have two open top six spots there potentially if Ryan Donato isn't brought back. And even if Ryan Donato is brought back, you could make a case there are still two open top six spots if you want to bump Teuvo Teravainen down in the lineup a little bit. One other thing I should bring up, though, two other potential top six options for this Blackhawks team that we aren't necessarily considering right here, right now. Michael Misa, we'll see where the Blackhawks wind up selecting in the 2025 NHL draft, but based on the year that he just had in the OHL, could be ready to make the leap to the NHL, and if the Blackhawks wind up taking him, he certainly could be an addition to this top six for Frank Nazar or Connor Bedard. Also, Nick Lardis, who will be making the leap to pro hockey after his final year with Brantford. Unfortunately, suffered an injury in Game 2 of Brantford's second-round playoff series. I got into a little bit of an update in the last episode that I just dropped over the weekend, although admittedly wasn't much of an update at all, as general manager Kyle Davidson really just said he's going to seek out a second opinion, which doesn't sound like the best news, but we have nothing official on Lardis at this point in time. Whenever we do, I promise you, Blackhawks fans, I'll have you covered. But Nick Lardis could be a top six forward option for the Blackhawks as well. I do think it's unlikely because I feel like they want to give him a little bit of taste of playing against grown men with Rockford first. But if he has a standout training camp or preseason, certainly could be in the cards. But however you want to go about it, based on these numbers, based on the roster makeup, based on the money that the Blackhawks have and them needing to hit the salary cap floor, they need to address this top six. They need to give Connor Bedard more help, and they certainly have the financial means to do so, and there's options available for them. Do they want to go and give big money to Mitch Marner? Awesome if they do. If not, we can still bring on, Brock Besser, Nikolai Ehlers, someone like that. And a move like that, I really believe, has to happen to get the Blackhawks out of the gutter of the NHL offensively, and also to give Frank Nazar and Connor Bedard the true help that I believe they deserve and need to take that next step in their development. So we'll see if that's what winds up transpiring for the Blackhawks offense in the summer, but there's my outlook based on the numbers that we saw from this season, from the eye test, watching this team this year. Where does Kyle Davidson need to give this team the most help up front? To me, it's undoubtedly in that top six, and I really think that's the only additions the Blackhawks could be making to this forward group based on the bodies they have returning in terms of the veterans next year, as well as the youngsters that I think they want to be giving chances in the bottom six as well too next season. So we'll see what winds up happening, but that takes care of my Chicago Blackhawks offensive outlook. Coming up in just a minute, make sure to stick with me, Blackhawks fans, as I get into an update on 2024 first round pick, Sacha Boisvert. But first, Blackhawks fans, I got to talk to you all real quick about Game Time. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never experienced being to a live NHL playoff game, it's truly unlike anything you've ever seen. The intensity, the speed, the atmosphere, and energy in the building, it's truly next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way for you to grab your playoff tickets, especially for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. And here's what I personally love about Game Time. The app provides you with a panoramic view of your seats, so that you can know what to expect before you make your purchase and also before you arrive. So go and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you got to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get $20 off with your first purchase. Again, that's the code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps when you download the Game Time app and create an account. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, Game Time. Segment 2, we finally got official confirmation from Blackhawks 2024 first round pick Sacha Boisvert of where he'll be spending his sophomore season after electing to transfer from North Dakota, where he was the NCHC Rookie of the Year. Now, though, Boisvert has officially committed to Boston University, which was expected, as I talked about on the show a few weeks ago when the news first broke that Boisvert would be transferring. Cam Robinson from Elite Prospects mentioned he was hearing Boisvert would be taking his talents to BU and carried a do not contact label into the portal because he already had his mind made up. Turns out that Cam Robinson was right as usual. Some of you may remember he was actually the one who was first really pumping out the news the Blackhawks were leaning towards taking Artem Levshinov with the second overall pick in the 2024 NHL draft. But for Sacha Boisvert, I'm really excited about this move. It was obviously disappointing for him the way things went for North Dakota last year, not making the NCAA tournament after a sluggish close to the season. North Dakota also elected to fire their head coach. That led to multiple players hitting the transfer portal. So it was kind of a struggle of a season for North Dakota as a whole, but that wasn't the case for Sacha Boisvert. He was one of the best freshmen in all of college hockey, led North Dakota in points and in goals as an 18-year-old, tallying 18 goals and 32 points in 37 games. He was mostly bumped up to the top line center spot there for the second half of the season, and rightfully so. He was incredible as a freshman. High-level goal-scoring abilities, which I think whenever I talk about Sacha Boisvert, that's the one skill set that I believe is really going to translate well at the next level. I think that puck just jumps off his stick. He has an excellent one-timer, another guy who's really deceptive and knows how to get himself open, and he also combines that with, and I don't mean to make this a knock on Nick Lardis, but while Nick Lardis is definitely the better shooter and has the higher upside in that department, they're both goal scorers in a true sense, but Boisvert goes about it with like a beefcake frame and rugged mentality, man. He's a hard worker, 6'2", already listed at 185 pounds, and he plays like it. He plays with a high motor, plays with an edge, a kid who trains in the gym a ton, takes boxing classes, I believe, in the offseason. And what's also super impressive about him is he's not only a hard worker in the hockey sense. This kid learned how to speak English in like a year and a half after being a natural French-born speaker throughout his entire life, hence the name Sacha Boisvert, one of my favorites, by the way, and one of the few good reasons for me to take French in high school. I don't really know why I did that, but it benefits me greatly in the name pronunciation department for a guy like Sacha Boisvert. But I'm super stoked about this move. Boston University obviously is a program us Blackhawks fans are pretty familiar with, given Alex Vlasic was there, Drew Comesso, Ryan Green most recently, right? They're one of the most prestigious programs in all of college hockey, regularly a part of the NCAA tournament, just made it to the national championship game despite your boy stupidly saying I didn't think they had a good enough roster to go and get it done. Usually one of the most talented teams in all of college hockey, usually get some of the bigger names in terms of incoming freshmen. And it shouldn't be a surprise that Sacha Boisvert ultimately elected to take his talents there. And I think it's a really good fit. I think the Blackhawks should be very happy with this decision as well. Jay Pandolfo, the head coach of the Terriers, has done an excellent job developing a ton of NHLers since he's taken over as the HC. So I think this is thumbs up all across the board for Sacha Boisvert moving to BU for his sophomore season, where he should get a ton of great experience playing some high-level hockey. Hopefully he'll get into the NCAA tournament this year, and who knows, if things go well for Sacha in his sophomore campaign, could be his final year of college hockey. I mean, we just saw Oliver Moore and Sam Brinzel both leave the NCAA after their sophomore seasons. And I would go as far as to say that Sacha Boisvert's freshman season with North Dakota was more impressive than what we saw out of Oliver Moore when he was a freshman. So should he keep up on the same path, should he go and have a smashing first season with the Terriers, could be all said and done for Sacha Boisvert in the NCAA and could be ELC time for him next. But I'm super happy with the move. Give me your thoughts down below in the comment section. And by the way, one thing I forgot to bring up, Sacha Boisvert, not going to be the only member, of course, of the Blackhawks 2024 draft class, playing for Boston University as 2024 third-round pick. Jack Bushman is set to be a freshman there in the fall. Should be a lot of fun covering Boston University in college hockey next season. But there are my full thoughts on Sacha Boisvert making the jump to BU official on social media. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans. Before I close out today's episode, still got to get into my weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all about Amazon Fire TV. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? You can now turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices, no console required. All you got to do is grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. And you can dive into hundreds of premium titles such as EA Sports, NCAA Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. And with 4K streaming, you can also watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. So head on over to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On in order to get started today. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gens, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone out there for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your week. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, up until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned, you can get local analysis on a national scale with the coverage you love from Locked On. And you can now go and check out Locked On NHL Game Night on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, time for Mailbag Monday before I close out today's episode. And as always, a reminder, if you're watching or listening to this right here, right now, and have a Blackhawks question that you want to reach out with, you can easily do so in the comment section below on YouTube, or you can also email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com or hit me up on any one of my social media channels. Very happy to see a great slew of questions on tap for this week. Let's go and do it again for next week's edition. First question that I wanted to answer today comes from Isaac Guerrero 8873 on YouTube, who seemingly has a question for me each and every week, which I always greatly appreciate. This week, Isaac asked, Gavin Hayes/Paul Ludwinski, both point-per-game players in their last year of the OHL, both played full first year of pro hockey in AHL, and both had about 10 points in approximately 60 AHL games full season. Could Nick Lardis be the same? Are we setting expectations too high for these OHL players and Korchinski too? And I think that's a really good point you bring up, Isaac. Just because you put up good stats in the OHL or WHL, QMJHL, whatever junior hockey league it may be, it does not mean that's going to translate up to the next level. And I think more importantly than just looking at the numbers, you got to go in, look at how these guys play in game situations, look at their highlights, look at how they actually get it done, look at what their true skills are, look at their frames, look at where they can succeed, where they struggle a little bit still. I think putting everything into perspective rather than just going and looking at the stats is far, far more beneficial when we're talking about prospects, because how you go about it is way more important. And I think a great example is Paul Ludwinski versus Nick Lardis. Paul Ludwinski, like Isaac said, was a point per game player in his final year in the OHL. But if you watched his highlights and you watched his game, you knew that there wasn't really a top 6 NHL upside possibility for Paul Ludwinski. If he is going to make it to the next level, it's going to be because of his intangibles, because of his work ethic, because of his speed, because of his motor, and because of those things, and because of the opportunity that he was getting as the captain, top line center of the Kingston Frontenacs, that turned into points at the junior level. Those things were good enough for him in that league. However, it was clear they weren't dominant traits that he had, and that's really what you want to be looking at with these youngsters, is their dominant traits. Do they have any of those? And for Nick Lardis, he definitely has dominant goal scoring abilities. He also has a high-end skating ability to possess along with it. And that's why, despite not having the largest frame, he became the first player since John Tavares to pot 70 goals in the OHL this year. It's important to know how you go about it. 70 goals for Lardis is obviously always going to jump off the page as a stat. But even prior to this year, we knew Nick Lardis, compared to a Paul Ludwinski or Gavin Hayes, had the higher upside if you had watched him, because he was just the one with the higher goal scoring process. But it is a great point you bring up, Isaac. And for example, like Gavin Hayes, the lack of goals that he scored this year in the AHL, I know he was utilized mostly in a bottom 6 role there, and there was a lot going on with Rockford this year, but definitely his goal scoring didn't translate as well as it was going to. And I think that's just overall, it doesn't mean it's going to happen in Nick Lardis. It doesn't mean that, Kevin Korchinski, who I'll talk more about here in just a second, isn't ever going to figure it out. It's just a reminder that it's a big time leap to go to that next level, and it doesn't happen at the same rate, and it doesn't translate as a whole for everyone in particular. So that's why whenever I've gone through my prospect rankings, while Nick Lardis has been a shoo-in for the top 10, I've never had him at the absolute top, while also admitting that he has the upside to one day be here. We just don't know because we haven't seen it against grown men. And if it doesn't translate at the next level, then we're kind of going to be left wondering, well, what else could Nick Lardis provide here? For what it's worth, I do think he's going to figure it out, but you definitely got to keep a little bit of an asterisk or a grain of salt next to those statistics, because you just don't know how they're going to fare against grown men. Next question comes from Craig Wojak, who asked, what do the Hawks do with Soderblom? Let him walk and see what Brossoit can do? Either way, I'd love the Hawks to draft Pyotr Andrianskov in the 3rd round this year. The Blackhawks goaltender situation as a whole is fascinating. I'm not going to give my full thoughts on it because I will be having my Blackhawks goaltending Outlook episode drop on Wednesday. Make sure to keep your eyes out for that. But with Laurent Brossoit still being under contract for another year, and Kyle Davidson saying in his exit interview that they hope he's healthy enough to go and compete for a roster spot in camp in the fall, makes me think they're at least up to the possibility of not bringing back Arvid Soderblom, who's going to be a restricted free agent this summer. You would think with the way that Drew Comesso has been playing to close out the season here in Rockford, I know they don't want to rush him, but I feel like it's time for him to take that jump and compete for the backup spot next year. And if you have Arvid Soderblom in that mix as well, let's say Brossoit does wind up earning that backup spot. You got Spencer and Brossoit under contract, and you have both Arvid and Drew fighting for starting spots down in Rockford. I don't know necessarily if that would be best for either of their development. I don't think either of them really need to be at the AHL level at this stage. And if you only have room for one, which I think they would, they definitely lean Comesso over Soderblom. So Going to be super interesting what happens with Drew Commesso, but what I will say, Craig, is I'd be pretty surprised if the Blackhawks take a goalie in this year's draft. I know Adam Guyan, who's also in the system, is not looked all that good with Minnesota Duluth, or didn't look all that good with Minnesota Duluth as a freshman this year. Didn't have a great draft first year out of being drafted either. Still a young goaltender. Crazier things have happened, but I'm not expecting the Blackhawks to take a goaltender in this year's draft. We'll see, though. Definitely in the cards. Next question comes from Darren Wilcox, 4683, who asked, Mailbag Monday, can you see any upside in Kevin Korchinski? I know D-men take longer to develop, but he hasn't shown anything. He doesn't hit. He doesn't shoot. He's too soft. I just want to get a positive glimpse of anything. And Darren, for sure, I mean, there's reasons to be concerned about Kevin Korchinski, even if he is only 20 years old. I think the biggest thing that he just really struggles with is the size and physicality of the NHL and having to make those decisions just a little bit faster. And it's frustrating to see compared to other guys who have kind of been able to figure it out immediately, like a Sam Rinzel or Artem Levshinov or Ethan Del Mastro in some sense. But what I always try to reiterate is that all those players came into the NHL with a size advantage. Kevin Korchinski does not. He's an undersized, thin, offensive-minded defenseman who doesn't play with a lot of physicality. And while you say he doesn't hit, yes, that is noteworthy, but that's never going to be Kevin Korchinski's game. And with a lot of big-bodied defensemen on the back end, I think it's okay to allow Kevin Korchinski to be comfortable in his game and not be something that he isn't. I will say the lack of assists that he's racked up in the NHL, like for what I believe is a good passing ability, in addition to seriously high-level wheels. I mean, he's one of the best skaters that I've ever seen in person. The shot definitely needs work. I think just overall the confidence needs a little bit of work in Kevin Korchinski, and just the belief that he can go and make a difference, jumping up on the rush, playing to his natural instincts. I really believe he can be a Wyatt Kaiser-like defenseman, like the way Kaiser goes about his game. Kevin Korchinski has all those same skills and then some. Because he's the better skater, it's just about him putting it together. I think his passing and his skating are always going to be his bread and butter. And I'm definitely not as high on Korchinski as I was a year and a half ago, but there's no reason to be quitting on this kid at 20 years old. I just think we've seen so many other defensemen come onto the scene and have success right away. It leaves our minds a little bit tainted against Korchinski because he hasn't found that same success. But what I've said before, I'll say again here. Even if Kevin Korchinski goes and spends all of next year with the Rockford Ice Hogs, he'll still only be 21 years old when the season comes to a close. Like, him being on the scene for 3 years makes us think differently than his age. Like, this kid still has a lot of runway. But what I will say is, again, I'm not thinking of his upside as high as I did a year ago. And also because he does have a similar skill set to Wyatt Kaiser. I've mentioned this in the past as well. I do wonder if one of those two guys could be expendable at the end of the day. And Kevin Korchinski is the one definitely with the higher upside of the two. Next question comes from Chewiest Bro, who asked, first off, the coach is coming out of contract. Who would you think to be the top three possibilities? Second, money no object. Who would you say KD goes after? And by the way, Chewiest Bro wanted me to give a shout out to the Perth Thunder in the AIHL. Had to give a shout out to Perth. Love that I'm getting followers all across the globe. Chewiest Bro, thank you for tuning into all of these episodes. Thank you for reaching out with your question. Huge shout out to the Perth Thunder for getting a shutout last weekend, I believe, and for also having a great start to their season. As far as the question goes, Chewiest Bro, dissecting the coaches that are under contract right now who could be legitimate options for the Blackhawks is a little bit difficult because we don't know exactly who's going to be available. Mike Sullivan is the obvious one that I have to bring up here. We don't know what his Pens future holds, but should he get canned by Pittsburgh, definitely someone Kyle Davidson should be interested in. I think Rick Tocchet with the Vancouver Canucks is a little bit interesting. They just announced today that they won't be picking up his team option. However, they do want to bring him back. If that doesn't wind up working out, though, I think Rick Tocchet could be an interesting option. And then I know he's not under contract right now, but he was at the beginning of the season, and that's Jay Woodcroft, who was, of course, the coach for the Edmonton Oilers when they reached the Stanley Cup final last summer, Those would probably be the three realistic guys who are under contract at the beginning of the season who could be available to be the next bench boss of the Blackhawks. Sullivan is really the true candidate that if he hits the market, that's the one the Blackhawks should be throwing all their money towards if they want to go with someone with experience. If they don't think that's as crucial, I think David Carl is a phenomenal option. And all of these coaches, they're going to come with some sort of downside. For Carl's, it's just that he's never been an NHL head coach before. But if that's not a problem for the Blackhawks, they certainly have the money to go and give him a very good offer. And they certainly have the money to go and bring on an established coach like Mike Sullivan if he winds up getting canned from Pittsburgh. I think those are the two candidates to really be keeping an eye out for. Next question comes from PHHDVM, who asked, Jack, thanks for your hard work this offseason. Greatly appreciate you saying that. For the mailbag, what is your bold prediction for the biggest offseason acquisition? Biggest bold prediction. I don't know. How about a bold hypothetical for you? Actually, I got to look at this contract real quick. I got to go look at this contract real quick. This was one that just came to mind. Again, it's bold, so probably not likely and probably won't happen. How about this one, though? Blackhawks get Mitch Marner. I don't know if that's too bold, but as the biggest name in the free agent market, I think that's a bold prediction. Where's this guy? How about this? This would be wild. I'll just give you a bold trade. Actually, thinking about this more, I don't like it more and more. What about Alex DeBrincat? 2 years left at under $8 million. I know he's an undersized player, obviously, but the Blackhawks need help in the goal scoring categories. For 2 years at under $8 million, the Blackhawks have the financials to make that work. And Detroit's just been a mess. The Yzer plan's looking sketchier and sketchier by the day. I wouldn't be all in favor of bringing back Alex DeBrincat. I don't think it's the best move, but I don't think it's the craziest move either, and would address the Blackhawks' goal scoring deficiencies while also not being tied to DeBrincat long term, because I do have worries about him performing in the Stanley Cup playoffs if he ever freaking gets there. So on a short term deal, that would be an interesting risk. How about that? That's a bold prediction for the offseason. Next question. Oh man. Oh, this was from Andy Alum on YouTube. Andy, I appreciate you reaching out. I forgot to write your name next to this, but I remember who it was from specifically. Now that the season is over, how do the Hawks go about reaching the salary floor in the most productive way? Don't listen to any haters on the show. Watch everyone. Great work. Thank you. Thank you, Andy. I greatly appreciate you saying that. And Andy, I know you are not a fan of the Frank the Tank Nazar nickname. I apologize, but it's something I gave the kid when he first got drafted. And I just, unfortunately for your sake, I just don't see it going anywhere because I love saying it too much. How do the Blackhawks reach the salary cap floor in the most productive way? Could go and get Mitch Marner, could go and land both Nikolai Ehlers and Brock Besser in the free agent market. They need to address this forward group. It's the biggest thing they need to address this summer. Get Connor Bedard more help. I think that's the best way to go about doing it. Maybe take on one more bad contract from another team in order to take on an asset. Kyle Davidson's been pretty good at those types of moves since taking over as GM. Last question comes from Zane Mandel, who asked through email, I was impressed with Ryan Green's skating and penalty kill ability. Do you see him as someone getting decent middle 6 minutes next year, or do you think he plays mostly in Rockford? I'd guess Ryan Green gets some time with the Rockford IceHogs to begin the season, but if all goes well for him down there, he'll be back up in the NHL. I know the Blackhawks have high hopes for him. They think he can be an NHL puzzle piece, but I also do think it would be smart for him to get some time with the IceHogs to not rush his development or anything. And I think there's going to be a good slew of those guys beginning the year in Rockford, like we saw happen prior to the start of this season. But if Ryan Green has a strong preseason and training camp, the Blackhawks are going to give him every opportunity to make the team out of camp, just whether or not he goes and takes it. And if he doesn't, it's, again, not the end of the world. The kid's only 21 years old coming out of college. Most kids in that spot need some time in the AHL before becoming full-time NHLers. But that's going to take care of today's beefy episode of Locked On Blackhawks. Everyone, as always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Right now, wherever you may be, or I guess that doesn't make sense. Go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube right now and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Until the next episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.